They're ready to eat, and for most pig producers, the single greatest expense in raising pigs is their feed costs. And handling the feed on the farm is one of the single greatest time sucks for most pastured pig producers. Come on, pigs! Unless, of course, you can grow more of the feed on your farm for your pigs.
This group of pigs has had a lot of daikon radish and a little bit of chicken, but they are just tearing this chicory up.
Unless you're able to grow or use alternative feed options, each pig will consume roughly 1,000 pounds of grain to reach market weight. That is a lot of grain. If you're raising just 2 to 4 pigs in your backyard, handling this much feed may not be that big of a deal. But if you're raising 10 pigs, you're looking at 5 tons of grain in a 4 to 6 month window of time. So what's the best way of handling all this feed? I'd say it depends on how many pigs you're feeding and how you are feeding them. For example, I fed our group of 20 feeder pigs in this paddock behind me here. With that bulk feeder, they had access to free choice grain in that feeder around the clock while they were also foraging, but I didn't have good forage for them. So I looked for a quick, easy way to fill the feeder. So I used bulk feed. The 10 sows that are in here with this boar are in their gestation cycles. They only need 4 to 6 pounds of grain per day in their diet, but they'll eat a whole lot more. And it's fairly convenient to give them a 50-pound bag of grain rather than have to scoop it out in a 5-gallon bucket. And it also doesn't bounce off as easily while I'm riding through the pastures as 5-gallon buckets do on the rack of this four-wheeler. I've tried just about every method of handling feed on the farm. I started off by driving almost 200 miles with a trailer in my truck going to get feed in these 55-gallon drums every month. By the time I drove, loaded the feed, and got back, it took me 8 hours, and then it took me another couple hours to unload those drums with my tractor and to get it situated where I needed it. What I didn't count on, and many people don't consider, is how much wear and tear on your vehicle and equipment you're putting in while handling all the feed. Putting 400 miles on my small truck and trailer while pulling 1 ton of feed every month was way more hassle than it was worth. I didn't know it at the time. At the time, we had 4 American guinea hogs, and they didn't eat quite as much feed. But when I added 12 to 15 meat pigs to the farm, that number increased dramatically. You see, smaller pigs don't consume as much feed, but once they get to 100 pounds or so, you can count on 3 to 5 pounds of feed that each pig will consume per day. Then I started making almost 2 trips every month. It got to be really laborious. And then I switched to a feed mill that was about as far away, but they would actually deliver the non-GMO pig feed to my farm. So I had them deliver 6 to 8 tons in these 1-ton super sacks. And until just recently, we kept using those super sacks. You see, they'll hold 1 ton of feed, and they've got these ears on the top on each corner, and they can be easily lifted with pallet forks. But unless you've got a heavy tractor, not just one with powerful hydraulics, it is wildly dangerous lifting those super sacks from the top. Truth be told, I'm really embarrassed to admit how I first handled that feed. I didn't have a way of storing those super sacks. If I put them in the barn, we'd have rats, raccoons, many other varmints that would just tear up those feed sacks, and it would make a royal mess. So I purchased these hopper bottom feed totes that would hold roughly 22 to 2,400 pounds of grain in them. This one's currently filled with bags of feed, but it's got a slope inside and it's got a drain on the bottom. And I can just pull this gate and the feed will fall out when there's just loose feed in there. The problem is with that second section on them, they're about 5.5 feet tall. My John Deere 4044M with the loader would handle the weight if I kept the weight real close to the tractor. But I had 2 problems. First, the tractor wasn't quite heavy enough to be well balanced or wide enough. Second, it wasn't tall enough. For the longest time, I pulled a boneheaded move and turned the forks upside down every time I got a load of feed. Worse yet, then I would drive the tractor on top of cross ties to give me enough height to drain those super sacks into those feed bins. It was stupid. I switched to buying feed from my local co-op. They special ordered it for me in super sacks. and they would actually set them in this container that I fabricated out of IBC totes. I cut the top rails off of it, left a little bit of plastic here on the top so that when the feed bag sat in, it wouldn't be punctured by the rails. And most importantly, I cut a hole in the bottom of it so that when I picked it up with my tractor, I could drain the super sacks out of the bottom with that hole that I'd made. It worked beautifully. Even though my local co-op stored that feed for me and helped me handle it much easier, it still took a lot of time and energy. You see, with my trailer that I'd use, I could only get 2 tons of feed at a time. By the time I got to the farm, hooked the trailer up, got to the co-op, loaded it, came back, and unloaded it, it took me over 3 hours, often 4 hours, for each 2 tons of feed. That's still a day's worth of labor every 4 to 6 weeks, every 6 tons of feed that I would use. It was a whole lot better than the previous efforts that I'd used, but it still hadn't been ideal. Last week, I've had this feed bin delivered, and as it turns out, I should have done it a lot sooner. For the longest time, I dilly-dallied around not dealing with a feed bin because I didn't think that it'd be very practical, and I wasn't sure how to get one set up. A new one cost $15,000, and I'd seen used ones for $500 to $1,500 online, but I wasn't sure what size concrete pad they needed and many other factors. So I waited. In a previous video, I've dealt with what it takes to get a feed bin set up. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. I'll put a link to it right here in the card, and I'll also try to remember to link it at the end of this video. You see, getting this feed bin has been a game changer, and the reason is because it reduces my time, my labor, and my equipment costs. I got the first load of feed delivered yesterday, and I got the invoice today, and I wanted to give you a price point comparison of purchasing feed in 50-pound sacks, 1-ton super sacks, or in buying it in bulk. There is a 6-ton minimum for me if I'm purchasing in super sacks or having it delivered to my farm. There's really not much cost savings if I'm purchasing 6 tons at a time or 1 ton at a time if I purchase it from my local farm supply store. I could save a little bit more money if I drove the 150 miles to the feed mill, but it is not worth the wear, the tear on the equipment, and the time. So if I purchase the feed in 50-pound bags, it costs me $450 per ton in 50-pound sacks. If I purchase it in the 1-ton super sacks, it costs me $425 per ton. Having it delivered to the farm in the grain bin, it cost me $345 per ton. That's a savings of $80 per ton of what I was paying and $100 per ton if I were to buy it in 50-pound bags. Just in feed costs, at my current usage, this grain bin will pay for itself in less than a year. It saves me about 10 hours per month going to get the feed, bringing it back to the farm, and putting it in storage containers that are rodent proof. This is one of those purchases that I wish I had saved for a couple years ago, and it would have paid for itself rapidly. But it all depends on how you feed your animals. For example, on my breeder pigs, I can throw out a 50-pound sack of feed much easier than I can scoop 2 buckets of feed for the pigs. If I'm only saving $20 per ton, I'd rather use the 50-pound bags. It's getting dark and the geese are flying over. Sorry about that. So when I'm feeding rations like to our breeder sows, or when I'm rotating our pigs through pasture and I'm only wanting to give them 50 to 75 pounds of grain per day, the thing that's the most important there is convenience. Saving $20 a ton is not that helpful, but this grain bin makes it easy to store the feed that's water and rodent proof. With the bucket gate, I can easily fill 5-gallon buckets without any problem. And it's easy to load. If you're trying to feed a bulk drop feeder, it is not worth doing 50-pound sacks of feed because it'll take a lot of time and energy to put those 50-pound sacks of feed in the top of that drop feeder. Is it worth it to do 50-pound sacks of feed, super sacks of feed, or a grain bin? If you're going through 3 or more tons of feed per month of the same type of feed, it might be worth doing a grain bin. If you're just feeding a ton or 2 per month, whether you're using super sacks or 50-pound sacks of feed, if you're in a situation like mine, you may save a little bit or more money doing super sacks, but convenience is more of an issue than money savings. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please share it with people you think may find it interesting. Take care and have a great day.